In terms of the changes to support items, thinking Redemption and Knight's Vow primarily, there's a couple of things there that are sort of big takeaways for us. The first is the value of support items that have really apparent power. This is something we talk about internally quite a lot anyway, sort of the difference between invisible power and really appreciable visible power. But say Redemption is a great example of how much better something that's really sort of concentrated and well communicated can feel than, say, an invisible aura that, while it may be as powerful or more powerful, doesn't feel anywhere near as good.
So I might be biased here, but I think support itemization was the biggest change of the preseason. All the assassin stuff was cool, but it could easily be that the most important changes were to support itemization and people didn't realize. And the reason this could be the case is that people don't notice the sort of like invisible power that supports bring. And a great example of this is how long it took people to realize Janna was broken as hell because like a Janna keeping her team alive like isn't as obviously strong as a Rengar or whatever, just one-shotting you over and over again in your fountain. So it's easy for like invisible support power to go unnoticed and for people not to realize how strong stuff like the old Aegis is because it's an invisible buff to the team. And so like going back to the dev blog, people are realizing the impact of redemption only because of how well like communicated the active on redemption is. It's this giant green circle that heals your entire team for 500 HP each. And when that item is used, it's like, wow, the support just changed the game by using that item. And it's easy to see how they did it, it's obvious. And it makes the person using it feel good, it makes everyone else recognize their role, it's great. I think if they wanted players to feel their impact, like a visible effect on the game, not an invisible one, then they did a great job with redemption.
The other thing that was reinforced for us was the value of items that are really tailored to what you want to be doing as a champion. Knight's Veil's a good example of that. If you're buying that on somebody like Braum or Alistair, it lets you soak even more damage for your allies, and then lets them sort of help you out at the same time. Similarly, if you're playing Soraka and you want even more healing, Redemption can be a great way to sort of double down on that. Compared to items that are much more just sort of raw stat based, harder to feel power, but also just sort of equally good on everybody, we sort of feel that much more tailored items give you a much, generally sort of better and more appreciated experience.
On the other hand, I don't think they made redemption really fit what the champions who build it really want to do. Like the guy says, Knight's Vow on a melee tank support makes sense. You soak damage to protect your team. I'm pretty sure it feels good to build, but honestly, I don't know. I think I've built it like twice, but still. Like, but anyway, so the thing about redemption is it doesn't really fit the goal of the sports who build it. So let me start by saying I think the giant AoE heal is great. On redemption supports, you heal and shield your team in team fights to keep them alive. So it fits your goal really well. But all its other strengths seem sort of random and contrary to your goal. It had like a giant range, but as a support, you need to fight with your team. Like you can't do shit alone. And if your team dies without you, you're alone and screwed. Like unless you're playing Brand or something. So the giant range doesn't really make sense because you should be fighting with your team. Like it's literally in the name. You support your team, which you can only do when you're with them. So you shouldn't want to be away from your team while they're fighting. The next unnecessary strength is the damage. In general, outside of laning phase, supports abilities are used for their utility, not their damage. And I'm talking about who I think should be redemption supports here, like Janna, Karma, and Nami, not high damage supports like Brand or Zyra. So the damage also seems like it's a sort of random effect. Although you could argue that if it's a giant green circle for your team, it should be a giant red circle for their team as well, so it should deal damage. And it does 10% max HP though, it's a good bit, and damages minions as well, which normally is not a support's job, but I mean, I could see the argument that the circle should obviously be good for your team and bad for their team, so it's whatever. But a much bigger problem for me is the ability to use it after death. Like maybe if you're playing Braum or Alistar or something, you're happy with taking all the enemy's abilities and dying. But if you're playing Janna or Karma and you do that, you just threw the game because you can't do anything while you're dead. Like on these champs, you're supposed to do as much as you can without dying. Like when you're positioning versus an Annie as Janna and you need to consider her potential to flash Tibbers, like you need to be close enough to your team to save them, but not so close to her that she can just kill you herself. And the name of the game is helping your team as much as you can, and you usually can't help much once you're dead. So like don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating for playing like those stupid like KDA Horgianas that stand super far back and build full tank and just never die but are useless. Like I'm saying you should be trying to help your team as much as you can, which usually entails being alive. Except with redemption, which you can still use after you die for some reason. Like it just seems to fly in the face of proper support play. Like it's like some rioters were talking to each other and they were like, supports really have a lot of actives. I was playing Janna yesterday. I had a Sightstone, I had a Talisman, a Locket, a Crucible, a Pink Ward, I had a Sweeping Lens. I had this new Redemption item we're testing, and I kept dying before I was able to use all my active items since it's hard for me to keep track of all these items. And then I just die, and I realize I still have all these actives off cooldown, and it feels bad, man. So wouldn't it just be really cool if we could use Redemption after dying? Like, plus, dying wouldn't feel as bad since you could still have an impact on the game instead of just, watching helplessly as your team wins or loses without you. So that's where I think they were coming from. Although maybe there were some reasons I didn't think of. But, like, the problem is that, again, support shouldn't be dying at the start of fights. And when you consider the 2.5-second delay on the active, you should actually be looking to use it early when you think you're going to need it, like the heal in 2.5 seconds, not when you need it right now, because obviously it's on delay. And if you've died as a support, it's probably too late because the fight's going to be over way faster than 2.5 seconds. Okay, so even if Redemption does have strengths that don't fit the role of its users, why is that a problem? Well, like he was saying, it feels good when you have strengths that align with your goal, and having this random power that doesn't feel as good limits how much power the item can have while still being balanced. So I think maybe the damage on Redemption makes sense. There's this circle that's obviously good for your team and bad for their team, so it needs to have damage. But the abilities to use it after death and from a huge range don't fit with what a support should be, which is alive and with their team. So I would get rid of those and see how the item does. And if it needs it, transfer some of that power to the heal. It might seem like less cool of an item since the active wouldn't have all these cool things with it, but I think it would be worth it since it would make it align more with the goals of the champs that use it.